Mr. David Harris, Chief Executive Officer of the American Jewish Committee, Mr. Solomon Asser, President of the American Friends of the Jewish Museum of Greece, His Excellency Ambassador Dani Dayan, Consul General of Israel, Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Theophili, Permanent Representative of Greece to the United Nations, Mr. Alexis Varonos, Consul General of Cyprus, Mr. Jens Janik, Deputy Consul of Germany, Deputy Consul of Germany, Mrs. Catherine Fleming, Provost of New York University, Mr. Vasilis Tsamis, Chief Financial Officer of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, Ms. Nancy Papaioannou, President of the Atlantic Bank, Mrs. Betty Ehrenberg, Executive Director of the World Jewish Congress, United States and North America, Mr. Vassos Papagapitos, Founder and President of Chamber Music Hellas, Mr. David Levy, Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee of New Jersey, Mr. Marvin Marcus, President, and Mr. Andrew Marcus, Vice President of the Kehila Kedosha Yanina, the only Greek Jewish synagogue in New York, Professor Dimitrios Argyriadis, unconditional supporter of these events, representatives of American Jewish organizations, distinguished guests, and valued friends of the Consulate General of Greece in New York, I welcome you tonight on behalf of Consul General Konstantinos Koutras. I am Jimmy Demetro, and I have the honor of being your Master of Ceremonies tonight. Exactly 60 years after the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution creating January 27 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day to commemorate the victims of state-sponsored mass murder during World War II, and to encourage the development of education programs to help prevent future genocide. Millions were unjustly killed. Among them, 6 million European Jews, and among them, 67,000 Greek Jews, representing 87% of the Jewish population of Greece. That's the highest percentage of Jewish loss of any officially occupied country. The Holocaust raises questions about our humanity. How do we begin to fathom the depravity, the horror inflicted on so many innocent people? How could the Holocaust have happened? Why did it happen? Can it happen again? Is it happening again? How do we preserve the sanctity of never again when it is up against the threat of again and again? Questions abound on days like this. Answers do not. Nevertheless, stopping to acknowledge where we have been, where we are, gives us insight and strength to keep going. It is in this spirit that we meet tonight to honor so many unjustly lost. Our first speaker tonight is a much admired gentleman who happens to be actually our host for the evening. It is my pleasure to welcome Consul General of Greece, Mr. Konstantinos Koutras.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Mr. Demetro. Thanks to him, I don't have the privilege to greet and thank each and every one of you, because my 5 minutes would be exhausted immediately. I will start, though, with a personal story. A few weeks ago, I received holiday wishes from a holy man, my spiritual father, His Eminence Makarios, Archbishop of Australia, who, among other things, wished that I would, in love and wisdom, serve the salvation of men and bear witness to certainty in a world that is afraid and tormented and seeks hope and meaning and redemption that it may live. It is of this afraid, it is of this tormented world, it is of hope and meaning and, God willing, redemption. It is of this certainty that I wish to say a few words today. 3 generations ago, distinguished guests, while the peoples and leaders of the world averted their gaze, millions of us were uprooted, displaced, herded, and killed in what remains the blackest moment in human history. Our fellows were pulled out of their lives and erased, methodically and officially, as much as almost casually. All they had was taken from them, and all they were ever going to have. We cast our thoughts now in their memory. May it be a blessing, and in doing so, we may take a moment to count all that we ourselves are missing in their absence. The wives and husbands, distinguished guests, they never met. The children, they never had. The novels and sonatas, Mr. Papagapitos, they never wrote. The things they never got to do are still all part of this gaping hole that lingers in our own hearts. We remember them today, but that is not enough. Daniel Goleman has said that memory is attention in the past tense, and I concur. But I also know that it may indeed be time that we should yank this attention from the past tense, forcefully so, violently perhaps, and bring it forth now into our present. For our attention today, dear friend Danny, and tomorrow must be in a multitude of places. In Paris, in London, in Berlin and Stockholm, and right here at home, David. In California, in Pittsburgh, in Jersey City, in Williamsburg, on the R train, ladies and gentlemen, on the bus to work. And our attention must indeed shift, and smartly, from the blue glare of our phone screen illuminating our faces to the world around us. If we are ever to break this cycle of ignorance, which breeds fear, which breeds violence, we need to leave our comfortable echo chambers, stop looking down, and start looking about us. We desperately need to stop stepping aside and start stepping in. Whenever and wherever it may be that our brothers and sisters are victimized by a blow, a push, a slur, or by the writing on the wall. By the writing on the wall. We know that we are fighting other people's fears, as well as our own. And we know that fear is something we either yield to or something we resist. We cannot meet it halfway, and we shall not. Of this, I am certain. All of us alike, Jews and Gentiles, will conquer our own fear and lay the fear and violence of the aggressor to rest. We shall stand tall. We shall look the monster in the eye until it never rears its ugly head ever again. Of this, I am certain. Of this, I am certain. We bear witness today in love and wisdom. We refuse to be afraid or tormented. We cherish hope. We seek meaning, and we pray for redemption. But, above all, distinguished guests, with our hearts full of humility, our minds devoid of doubt, we have this one certainty. When the dust settles, it is the righteous. It cannot be anyone but the righteous who have prevailed. Of this, I am certain. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Our next speaker is well known in our community as a tireless worker for Jewish and human rights. I present to you the president of the American Friends of the Jewish Museum of Greece, Mr. Solomon Nasser.
Thank you, Jimmy, for the compliment. Distinguished guests, I'm not going to repeat all of you because Jimmy did a great job mentioning every one of you. But thank you for being here tonight. As president of the American Friends of the Jewish Museum of Greece, and on behalf of its board, I would like to thank you, and especially our host, Dr. Koutras, the Consul General of Greece, honoring this special Holocaust Day for 2020. As Jimmy mentioned before, Greece lost 83% of the Jewish population during the Holocaust, the highest percentage of any other country. Because the Jewish population in Greece had been there since 2400 BC, the oldest diaspora community in the world, Greek Jews lived under the illusion of safety, as Dr. Matzes writes in his book. They were taken to camps because they had never experienced the pogroms that other European Jews had experienced. The Jewish presence in the Hellenic soil was documented in a recent publication of the museum, a book called Corpus, and it was presented here in New York last October. The Jewish Museum of Greece is an institution that's 43 years old, and it's dedicated to preserve the history of the existence of the Jewish life in Greece. At these difficult times that ignorance of the history had led us back to anti-Semitism and racism, the museum has become a pivotal source for teaching the Holocaust in Greece, and especially to the younger generation. The Jewish Museum and the Central Jewish Congress of Greece have been organizing yearly trips to Auschwitz for Greek Orthodox students to learn about the devastation of the Holocaust. The Tsakopoulos Kandelakis family, who happens to be the Lieutenant Governor of California, have been dedicated supporters through the American Friends for those trips. The Jewish Museum of Greece is a live monument of this history, and its work includes teaching the Holocaust, not only to students, but to teachers, to teach the students. The Greek state has been commemorating the Holocaust Remembrance Day since it was adopted from the European Union, and the president itself has been present in those events. I urge you to support the important work of the museum in Greece, strengthening your financial pledge if you can, or just by spreading the word of its existence. The American friends have been a crucial support of the museum. Now, at this point, I would like to ask from the audience, the survivors of Holocaust, to stand up. I know there's few of them out there. A lot of them are alive because the Greek Orthodox friends of theirs made things possible, including me, to be here tonight. Now I would like to take a minute of silence to pray for those who perished during the Holocaust and for every innocent human life being persecuted or perished because of its religion, race, or color. Thank you so much.
I have the honor now of bringing to the podium the distinguished Consul General of Israel, Mr. Dani Dayan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate tremendously the fact that the Greek Consulate General in New York every single year convenes this event. It's not obvious. Thank you so much, my friend. This is a Remembrance Day. In Remembrance Days, we usually speak about the past. And indeed, last year I spoke about the Jewish child from Rhodes or from Crete and his terrible voyage to Auschwitz through sea and ground. And I spoke about the workers in the port of Thessaloniki that were decimated by the Nazis. And of course, I didn't forget to mention the righteous among the nations, like, for instance, Bishop Chrysostomos or Mayor Carrer from Zakynthos, that saved their entire community. But this year, unfortunately, I feel compelled to speak about the present, to speak about the future. Because I was naive. I was naive enough to believe that the suffering that humanity, that mankind endured as a result of the barbaric anti-Semitism of Nazi Germany, I wasn't naive enough to believe that the suffering of the Jews, but the suffering of humanity because of that barbaric regime will save the world at least a century or two from the scourge of anti-Semitism. But I was naive. Anti-Semitism is with us here again in a magnitude that we didn't imagine it is possible barely 75 years after the Shoah. It happens in this country where 14 Jews were already assassinated in the last year and a half in anti-Semitic attacks in Pittsburgh, in Poway, California, in Jersey City, And a Jew lies, as we're speaking, in an hospital, unconscious forever, as a result of the attack, the anti-Semitic attack in Monsey, New York. He will never recover. And in France, 10 Jews were murdered in a decade in anti-Semitic attacks, and only a very strong and sophisticated door and lock separated the Jewish community of Halle in Germany from massacre in the most sacred day of the Jewish calendar. So my friends, anti-Semitism has raised his ugly head all over the world, in the United States, in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, unfortunately also in Greece. There are two differences. I'm not implying that we are in Germany of the 30s. No, we are not, thank God. Although we see, and that some may say that this is a different issue, but we see a fundamentalist, genocidal regime in Tehran that imitates Nazi Germany. When they say that they will wipe out Tel Aviv from the map, they don't mean the buildings, they mean the Jews. And in that respect, the response of the civilized world is insufficient. Fortunately, the response of the civilized world to conventional anti-Semitism, if we can use that term, is different from what it was 70, 80 years ago. Is it enough? I'm not sure. But at least it's encouraging, for instance, to see that President Pavlopoulos is coming to Israel tomorrow to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. It's encouraging that the Greek Ministry of Education adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, and that Prime Minister Mitsotakis announced in November that Greece will adopt it as a country, as a government. I was also touched by a letter I received today from the Greek Orthodox Archbishop of America, asking me to convene to meet in order to exchange ideas how to defeat the scourge of anti-Semitism. There is one difference between us and the Jews and the Gentiles of Europe and the world in the 30s. The difference is that now we don't have the excuse of the inexperience. Now we know for sure, empirically, where anti-Semitism can lead the world, what the consequences may be. Therefore, as my friend and colleague, Consul General Koutras said, words this time are not enough. With all the encouraging responses of many countries, many leaders, many governments, many institutions, words this time are not enough. And if an alliance remains an alliance of remembrance and doesn't convert itself into an alliance of action to completely defeat and erase the scourge of anti-Semitism from the face of earth, we will be posed again with the calamity that we saw decades ago. I hope that governments and persons of goodwill and morality all over the world this time will rise to the occasion and will join forces in order to defeat all kinds of anti-Semitism. Thank you so much.
Όταν βρέθηκα εκεί, ένιωσα γυμνή, ανυπεράσπιση. Κανένα ερώτημα δεν μπορούσα να θέσω όπως πώς είναι δυνατόν να έγινε αυτό, πώς είναι δυνατόν να το έκανε κάποιος άνθρωποι. Γιατί αυτά τα ερωτήματα δεν είχαν νόημα. Αυτά τα πράγματα είχαν γίνει και εγώ ήμουν εκεί πέρα μάρτυρας. Περπατούσα σε αυτούς τους χώρους που ακόμα κράβγαζαν τον πόνο. Και προχωρούσαμε και βλέπαμε τα αντικείμενά τους. Επιτέλους, για μένα το πιο επώδυνο ήταν οι φωτογραφίες που αποδείχτηκαν πόσα και πόσοι άνθρωποι χάθηκαν.
Τα παιδιά επισκέπτονται μεν το Auschwitz μια φορά, αλλά η εμπειρία είναι εμπειρία ζωής και μάλιστα εμπειρία η οποία εκφράζεται πολλαπλώς και στο οικογενειακό περιβάλλον και στο μαθητικό περιβάλλον. Είναι ζωντανοί μάρτυρες ενός γεγονότος.
65 שנים אני משוחרר מהאושוויץ. אני לא יכול להשתחרר מהקרונות האלה שאתם רואים פה.
The American Jewish Committee is an advocacy organization working to promote religious and civil rights for Jews internationally. It promotes civil rights for all people and has a history of fighting against forms of discrimination in the United States and elsewhere. Our keynote speaker tonight is the dynamic Chief Executive Officer of the American Jewish Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. David Harris.
Kalispera, Erev Tov, Guten Abend. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin by thanking my friend Konstantinos Koutras for hosting this very special annual event, which I know comes not just from his head, but from his heart. And I'm honored to be here together with my dear friend Danny Dayan, who represents Israel so skillfully here in New York and far beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who know me, I've been a lifelong friend of Greece, of Hellenism, and I dare say that I would not have met my wife but for the Greek island of Kefalonia. But that's a story for a different time. This evening, after leaving the Hebrew Union College, together with several colleagues, I'll be traveling to the airport and flying to Krakow, Poland tonight. On Thursday, we, AJC, will be accompanying as many as 60 world Muslim leaders in what has become the most senior Islamic delegation ever to visit Auschwitz or any Nazi death camp. They include leaders from Saudi Arabia, from throughout Asia, North Africa, Europe, and the United States. And the urgency of this visit becomes only more obvious as time passes. And as I watch these young people from Greece and our friend, the General Secretary of the Ministry of Education, who has done so much to advance understanding of the Shoah in Greece. But the urgency for all of us, I think, becomes still more apparent, and Danny Dayan spoke about it. But for me, remembrance is important, indeed it's essential. It's not enough. And too often, ritualistically, we engage in a period of remembrance for an hour, perhaps a day. We follow form, we bow our head, we nod at the prayers. If we know them, we recite them. And then we check the box and we move on. No, the 6 million are not resting in eternal peace, no matter how much we may hope in our prayers that that is the case. How could they be? And how can we rest in eternal life, knowing how they perished? For me, the true test of remembrance is what happens the day after. The occasions, the events, the ceremonies. And for me, the true test of remembrance is not only the teardrops during, but whether there are actions the day after. The true test of remembrance, yes, is to preserve and protect Holocaust memory from those who would, wherever, from the Golden Dawn Party to other fascist parties throughout the world, to those who would simply deny the Holocaust for whatever religious, political, or ideological reason from whatever source. Yes, we are guardians against Holocaust distortion and denial, but that's not the end of the story. It's only the beginning of the story. The story, as Danny Dayan said, is how do we deal with living Jews? We can all cry tears over dead Jews, and we should and we must, but we will not restore them to life. The test of whether an event like this has real meaning is whether we're prepared to stand up for those who are alive and perhaps in danger. And the growing resurgence of anti-Semitism around the world, which by now ought to be indisputable, should be a call to action. But is it? Will it be? Or will we resume business as usual on January 28th and 29th after the UN-mandated Day of Remembrance? And what will all those countries which are being so magnificently represented in Israel on Thursday, and in many cases next week in Auschwitz and Birkenau, what will their policies be after the speeches? Words are important, extremely important, but words are insufficient. The test will be how many more Jews will have to be killed in the name of anti-Semitism for the world to wake up and respond appropriately. It should not have taken us years and years and years to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. And without it, we don't even have a standard definition of what it's about. But how many European countries to this day have still not adopted it? And by the way, adopting it is only one step. Adopting it without implementing it, again, becomes meaningless. And though Ambassador Dayan was unusually shy, I'll say what he didn't say. And how many people will continue to assail Israel while crying tears on Yom HaShoah? The two cannot be separated as some would wish. It's impossible, as far as I'm concerned, to show up on January 27th, whether in Israel or Auschwitz or here or elsewhere, and on January the 28th, refuse to recognize the legitimacy of the only Jewish majority nation on earth, or to apply to it an entirely different political standard than to any other nation on earth, or to fail to recognize that as a nation it faces calls for its annihilation as we speak, including the more than 6.5 million Jews who live in Israel. So forgive me. of what value is it today to shed tears and bow one's head if tomorrow one is going to vote in Brussels or New York or Geneva or elsewhere to deny Israel its very right to defend itself against those who would wish to wipe it off the face of the earth. We Jews are not ready for another second Yom HaShoah. We are not interested in having people mourn for our death. We're interested in having people celebrate our life as they celebrate all life. That's the goal. And so, as we face this resurgence of anti-Semitism and ask ourselves why, we, governments, civil society, religious leaders, individuals need to seek to understand. I know, for one thing, that appallingly, knowledge of anti-Semitism is diminishing among young people, whether in this country or in Europe. And much as I applaud what the Greek Ministry of Education is doing, and it's so important, it's still a drop in the bucket. When we look at the results of surveys of young people, starting right here, less than half of young people in the United States today know what the Holocaust is, can identify what Auschwitz is, have a clue roughly how many people were murdered in the Holocaust, and in 10, 20, 30 years, what's in store for us? And I know that at the same time, within a few years, the survivors, including those who are here, are likely to pass on. My mother and my father are both survivors of the Holocaust. Both have passed on. They had hoped, perhaps all too naively, that after 2 millennia of anti-Semitism that has taken every religious, racial, political, and cultural form, the world would have finally said, enough. Enough. My father died before the recent spurt in anti-Semitism. But my mother, who lived in France when the Nazis arrived in the spring of 1940, never thought that again she would hear the word mort aux Juifs, death to the Jews. But she heard those words. She heard them in Toulouse. She heard them in Paris. She heard them in Brussels. She heard them in Copenhagen. She heard them in Burgas, Bulgaria. She heard them in Buenos Aires. And yes, she heard them here, in this beloved country that gave her sanctuary. And so, it falls to the next generation. As I already prepare my children, and now my grandchildren, someone must carry on. And yes, because we are Jews and we lost 1/3 of our people, including, one must add, 1.5 million children who were never given the chance to grow up. But it's not just because I'm a Jew, it's because I'm a human being, that my children and grandchildren must understand the slippery slope that began with mere words, mere ideas. A seeming lunatic imprisoned in the Landsberg prison in 1924 and 1925, who wrote a manuscript, Mein Kampf, which when he became chancellor in January of 1933, was dusted off by some perhaps, read, only to be dismissed as mere words of a raving lunatic. And we were told by all the intellectual cognoscenti that governance would moderate Hitler. After all, didn't government have to deliver the mail and pick up the garbage and collect the taxes? But those mere words move forward. Auschwitz was not built in 1934 or even 1935. In fact, the final solution was not implemented until January of 1942 at Wannsee. A 9-year period. January 1933, January 1942. How many points along the way could a more believing, more resolute world have stopped Hitler? But they didn't. They looked the other way. They convinced themselves of all kinds of pseudo-intellectual narratives, and instead, we mourn. Who is going to remind the world in the years ahead of that slippery slope that begins with mere words, by the way, that now are not confined to a Slim Jim pamphlet, but are more easily conveyed to an entire universe through social media? Who are going to be the filters as young people search the word Jew, or search the word Nazi, or search the word anti-Semitism without necessarily knowing what will pop up? Will it be serious, useful information? Will it be conspiracy theories and tropes? Who are going to be the filters? My parents are gone. All the members of my family older than me who survived the Shoah are gone, not to mention those who did not survive the Shoah. It's left to us. Literally. Literally. It's left to us because we cared enough on January 21st to come here, to be present, to be counted, unlike others who chose not to be here in a willful decision. It's up to us. And it's going to be very, very difficult going forward. We live in a world in which the very values of liberal democracy are under assault, in which the norms of the world in which we live are being challenged from all sides. We live in a world in which anti-Semitism has been given license on the right, on the left, and inside the Muslim world. It's coming at us from all sides. And my message, our message at AJC, if anyone thinks this is a uniquely Jewish issue, you fail to understand the central lesson of 20th century history. I refuse to call us the canary in the mine, which is usually what speakers invoke at this moment, because I refuse to die so that the miner can live. We've had enough of that role after 2,000 years. We're in this together. We're all in this together. Anti-Semitism may begin with Jews, but it will metastasize left unchecked, and it will destroy democratic society. And every minority community is at risk. We may be first, we're not the last. We're in this together. So I end by circling back to the beloved country of Greece. Some will ask at this point, well, wait a second, David, this is all pretty heavy. Why are you putting this on our shoulders? I'm only one person. What exactly is it that I can do? Well, first of all, none of us is one person if we stand together and link arms. None of us. But secondly, I look at someone like Archbishop Konstantinos, He had lots of alternatives, in theory at least, about what he could have done in 1943. Like many clergy around the world, he could have found any number of excuses or rationalizations or justifications to avoid confronting the Nazis. And he could have elaborately constructed those theories after the war's end to explain to himself and others why he remained silent while secretly praying for the Jews. But sometimes, as we learn from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, you have to pray not just with your lips, you have to pray with your feet. And Archbishop Damaskinos prayed with his feet when he went to the German SS and said no to the treatment of the Jews, no to the deportation of the Jews. And as some of you know, when he was threatened with shooting for what he had done in instigating a letter of protest, his response famously was, in the tradition of the Greek Orthodox Church, we prefer hangings to shootings. Was Archbishop Damaskinos from a different planet? Was he made from entirely different DNA than the rest of us? Or what about the mayor and the Archbishop of Zakynthos? Did they not brush their teeth in the morning? Did they not laugh? Did they not cry? Did they not wish to live to an old age? Did they not wish to see their children and their grandchildren thrive? But for them, there was something even more powerful than the immediate or the self. They understood that this was a moment of definition. If they were clergy, what did faith really mean? If they were political leaders, what did leadership really mean? They didn't go out and commission a focus group to determine what the most popular outcome would be. They acted in the true tradition of genuine faith. In the Jewish tradition, we are taught, but it is a universal belief, the notion of B'Tselem Elohim, which is the revolutionary principle of human equality, that we are all created in the image of God. It's a simple yet a profound contribution of the Jewish people to the world. If we are all, not just Greek Orthodox, not just Jews, not just Sunni Muslims or Shiite Muslims or Catholics, if we are all created in the tradition of God, and if this is how I have defined my life, when other lives are at stake, what are my courses of action? They set a very high bar for us. A very high bar for us. But they and other, as we call in Hebrew, Chasidei Umot HaOlam, righteous among the nations, the several hundred in Greece, the several thousand in Poland and the Netherlands, they set an entirely different standard for human interaction. That's our challenge. And I believe if we're to fulfill the commandment of Zachor, remember, Lo tishkach, do not forget, then ultimately the test will be not just what happens tonight, here, thanks to our friends at the Greek consulate, but no less importantly, where we stand tomorrow. Kalinikta.
Thank you.